So I'm Josh Laporte. I'm the course leader for this EJC course, European Journalism Center course in Brussels for U.S. journalism graduate students. There's a group of 12 coming over here to learn about the European Union and its institutions for a week. EJC is responsible for the first couple days. We're focusing on the more media element of it, what they actually like the life of a journalist. Although I have a feeling some of them are going to want to find out what it's like to actually get a job here and maybe work here someday. So that might be one of the other reasons some of the participants are on the program.
I think, the strange and the funny. Probably have to go with the Italians because honestly, I love Italy, but sometimes they're just so chaotic and so disorganized. You got to wonder how they managed to conquer, pretty much all of Europe and North Africa at one point in their empire. So I think that's very sort of strange and funny. But I love it. I loved Italy. It's one of my favorite places in the world.
The size of the rooms and the lack of an iron. When I got into the hotel, I needed to iron my clothes and there was none. And so that's kind of odd because in America, even like the really bad hotels usually leave you an iron and ironing board.
Basically everyone here speaks English. Even walking down the street and heard people passing who all spoke English. And I don't know, it makes me feel guilty to some extent because the only other language I speak is Spanish. So I realize here everyone speaks 3-4 languages sometimes.
The most interesting thing about Europe is that the food is so good and everybody is so fit.
Me, as an American, I would say the cultural differences between Europeans and Americans. I would say Europeans live more of a relaxed lifestyle, focus very much on the quality of life and a more active lifestyle than Americans do. Particularly where I've visited in Europe, I've been in urban environments, and I think there's more value in Europe towards urbanization than where I'm from in the States. So in those aspects, I enjoy it a lot.
So many languages in such a small amount of space. In the US, we have one language that we only sort of speak across a huge amount of space.
One thing that comes to mind, there's been quite a move towards non-smoking in the US. So now many cities are passing smoking bans and all of this. So it's been very interesting to be in Europe, and I've been in Europe before, but smoking seems to be a little bit more integrated into the culture, at least in contrast to kind of urban areas where I've lived in the US.
The architecture is certainly different. Everything's much smaller. I mean, I'm originally from Canada, and everything is just so huge in the US. The cars, the houses, the streets, everything. So everything is certainly a lot smaller and more compact, and I don't know, it's also like historic, I think, in Europe, obviously. So
I think there's so much good baked products in Europe. The bread, the pastries, the baguettes, the croissants. And how come all of the Europeans are relatively fit? No one's getting extremely large like some Americans, and yet they're eating all these pastries all the time. I want to know the secret.
Actually, I guess a very specific example. In the hotel we're staying, there are these little packets of sprinkles, which I think are the most curious, wonderful things I've ever seen. So I guess that's one.
The strangest thing about Brussels are the peeing fountains.
Well, I'm in print journalism, so in 10 years' time I'd like to have a paying job. But aside from that, I think I would love to write for magazines, and I would love to have at least some type of foreign experience.
I would love to be doing radio feature reporting. I'm very interested in public broadcasting, and I would love to see myself doing reporting features on social issues, kind of longer, not long format necessarily, but even 5-minute pieces about certain aspects of people's lives that may not come to fore in traditional kind of headline news.
I want to be telling compelling stories from across the world.
Ooh, I want to be a firefighter, fireman, policeman. No. My ideal job that I foresee is not only reporting on the process of journalism or of stories occurring, but also having an effect on the process at the same time.
In 10 years' time, I want to be paid. I want to have a job. No, I want to have a job that I love. I think that would be the luckiest thing for anybody, really, is to do something that you love.
A reporter on television or print. I'd like to be covering politics or diplomacy and defense issues.
I'd like to have written a book.
Be a foreign correspondent. My particular area of interest is Latin America, but actually coming here has opened my interest in Europe and how it relates to Latin America as well.
A foreign correspondent? I'd like to be a magazine writer, freelance magazine writer.
The major challenge for journalists is gaining trust. I think it's getting more and more difficult to gain the trust of anybody, whether it's politicians or companies or schools, and the trust of the public as well. I don't think the public trusts journalists.
Major challenge for journalists today is reaching a population with models that can remain profitable, ways to have jobs into the future.
I think the fact that the market is shrinking in so many ways, and you have to be able to have so many skills and do them all at once, you know, be a photographer and shoot video and write, and it's a lot of pressure on one person.
Well, I think it's difficult for someone who's beginning as a journalist because many papers have a shrinking budget, and so particularly as a foreign correspondent, they've been closing many bureaus, and it makes it difficult to get started.
Media ownership and like the consolidation of it under very few companies.
I think a lot of journalists, at least in the United States, need to get more of a spine and backbone.
Well, I think it's, in many ways, at least in the US, journalists have not the best reputation. I don't think it's the most respected profession. And with that, a bit of lack of respect, I think it's sometimes difficult to do your work and interact with other people you depend on to get your story.
I think getting people to pay attention to stories that matter.
I think the main challenge for journalists today is telling a story in a way that really affects an audience. I think there's such an oversaturation now that to get through with really tells a story is hard.
A shrinking market, I think. I mean, especially for print journalists.
I think the major challenge for journalists, and we keep having this conversation, is really what is journalism going to be in the future. It's a really uncertain time, and that's certainly what we're hearing across the board from people at different levels and who've been in the business for different, even for varying numbers of years. It just sounds like it's become very amorphous as to what it's going to mean to be a journalist, what kind of skills you're going to need to have, where you'll actually be published or where your work will be broadcast. It sounds like everyone is really grappling with what that's going to mean. And I think for us as young people coming into the profession, it's very uncertain. That doesn't mean it's not an exciting time, but I think all of us are kind of asking ourselves pretty much on a daily basis, where are we going to be working? Where will we be in 10 years? And how are we going to get there when no one really knows what the path is going to look like? Oh, you know, I actually had a different career path before I came to journalism. I'm sure I'd still be in that, which was in international rights programming. I worked a lot with educators who are integrating gender and women's rights into curriculum, particularly in India. And I love India. I've lived there a couple times, been there many times, and I'm pretty certain I would still be working in that.
I would probably have gone to flight school and have become a pilot.
An academic.
If I hadn't become a journalist, I would probably write stories. Become a fiction writer.
Probably a diplomat of some sort.
I think I would have become an archaeologist.
I'd like to think I'd be a rock star by now, but perhaps instead a starving documentary filmmaker.
I guess I would have become a writer.
If I hadn't become a journalist, I would definitely be a film director. I like working with the television medium.
I would have liked to have become a professional hockey player, but I don't think that was ever in the cards.
A social worker, I think. I think it's all about getting information to people.